Superhero couples live in a fantasy world. Many of them have remained young for decades. As time goes on, with new stories and relationships emerging, it's inevitable that more and more become, nonsensical. First up, this isn't a couple you typically expect to see, which is why it makes my cut. But at the end of the day, while random, it doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, what this relationship represented for both characters was kinda interesting. It also leads into one of the best series in the Age of X-Men era, which overall is a pretty weird and kinda controversial era, I think, for a lot of comic book fans in the X-Men history for sure. In Age of X-Men, the whole reason that Bishop basically ends up in prison, as seen in the Age of X-Men Prisoners, which is the one that I'm saying is, one of the best series, is because of his secret love affair with Jean Grey. This is because love and intimate relationships are outlawed in this world, all part of Nate Gray's plan to save the world and turn it into a paradise, by removing the conflicts often created by love. The original idea was to have Bishop in a secret love affair with Storm, according to Marvel senior editor Jordan White, but they ultimately decided to pair him with Jean instead because, well, Jean doesn't get to have a variety of romances really in the comics, which honestly is really true. She primarily is either paired with Wolverine or Cyclops, so to see her paired with Bishop, it's weird, but it's kinda cool. I kinda like it for them. Although I guess it's also kinda weird because when you think about the fact that Bishop is good friends with Cable, it's kinda like Jean's son. That's a little bit weird, but there's a lot of things that are weird. I just realized that. When it comes to just weird connections in comics, I mean, there's a lot of them. Is there any weird ones that you have read before where people were related but were romantically interested, or just like there's weird time travel things that just make it bizarre? Let me know what you think some of the weirdest relationships in comics are in the comments, because honestly, even when I think I'm talking about something that isn't weird, it is. That's so strange. This next one is honestly really a doozy. One of the worst on our list. The worst! And if you're wondering how it can possibly get worse than what I'm about to tell you now, I encourage you to stick around until the very end of this video, because it can get worse, I know. Although this one is definitely up there for me personally. We're talking about the terrible pairing of Hal Jordan and Arissa Rabb. Both superheroes, both Green Lanterns, one of whom was more like a kid sister to the other. And yeah, I'm not talking about Hal. Hal was not the kid sister in this scenario. Yeah, Arissa had basically like a schoolgirl crush on Hal that ended up manifesting in her using her ring to basically age herself up. Well, initially, Hal did rebuke Arissa's interest in him. Once she kind of willed herself to be aged up using her powers, he became a little bit more open to the idea of them being in a romantic relationship. If you're thinking that sounds super weird and disturbing, yes. Yes, it was. Scarlet Witch and Captain America are an odd couple because they aren't a couple you'd normally think of happening in the comics, especially if you are a fan whose initial introduction to these two was mainly through the MCU. They also mostly get together because Scarlet Witch is kinda lonely. Scarlet Witch is like, look, she got a lot of issues. I feel bad for her, really. And at least when we're talking about her motivation, I think in this relationship, that's kind of why. Also, like I said, she was going through a lot of stuff. The relationship was kind of part of that, being inherently problematic, just a bunch more of Wanda's stuff overflowing, as Wanda had basically ensorcelled Captain America to make him believe they were more of an item than they were. Fortunately, he broke free of her control, but there is also an alternate world where they actually just end up together earlier on, and Wanda ultimately kind of just like gets her hooks in Cap. The two become a couple who are responsible for basically reshaping the world, forcing it into this paradise vision they have for it after turning on their friends in their own alternate Avengers Disassembled. Basically like Avengers Disassembled if they were teamed up together, which honestly is pretty sad. Oh boy, oh bub. We are not talking about Wolverine in this next couple, but the next one is making me channel the sheer amazed reaction of Wolverine to his like flame covered adamantium coated claws just on the ground, like ah! At least in the fan edited version of that page where he returns from death with his flame claws. If you haven't seen it, it's great. There's just so many bubs on the page. When I first read it, I thought it was real, and then I went back to Return of Wolverine and I was like, man, I wish that fan edit was real. It's kind of great. Here we're talking about a couple from DC Comics, Batman and Black Canary. If you're thinking that sounds bizarre, that's because, well, it is. While these two briefly were a part of a love triangle in the main continuity in the past, way in the past, this relationship from Frank Miller's Batman universe, as seen in All-Star Batman and Robin, is honestly just so random. Why do these two hook up? I guess just because they're both insanely hot vigilantes, I got nothing else. This relationship is even more random than the last, and if you're thinking how is that possible, trust me, it's possible. It happened when Tony Stark's Iron Man found himself teaming up with the Guardians of the Galaxy. One night at a bar where they were all out together, he started to kinda like flirt with Gamora, and surprisingly, Gamora flirted back with him. They ended up back on the spaceship and had a quick fling. Sometime after Iron Man applied, he could do better than just impressing a woman with his wealth. After they, finished, Gamora decided to go back to the bar. Meanwhile, Iron Man seemingly just chose to stay in bed in some level of pain after their encounter. I have to imagine, based on Gamora's characterization, that, he had an experience. This next one is just straight up weird. Batwoman and Nocturna were not in a healthy relationship, which is honestly why they're making my cut here. It's weird and it's gross in a bad way. Nocturna in essence manipulated Kate into having a relationship with her, and this relationship kind of also followed the very serious one Kate had with Maggie, which wasn't manipulative and actually almost led to these two women getting married in the comics. Unfortunately, there were too many hurdles for the couple and the creative team behind their engagement to climb for the two to end up with their happy ending, down the aisle, finally committing to each other. Alas, they ended up breaking off their engagement, and instead Kate was trapped in this toxic relationship with Nocturna for a while. A relationship where Nocturna manipulated Kate into being with her, and then also made Kate believe that she herself was a vampire and a monster, when really that's basically Nocturna's thing, not Kate's thing. Nocturna really seemed to be competing with the Joker here for the worst romantic partner in all of comic book history award, although I think the Joker still takes it. This next ship is just a weird one, but especially when you consider that these two very nearly tied the knot. They both come from two kind of different but adjacent worlds. We're talking about StarLord from Guardians of the Galaxy and Kitty Pryde, aka Kate or Cat from the X-Men. The adjacent bit is that both these teams are known to go to space. They got lots of space adventures. While the X-Men are an Earth-based primarily team, they do have a lot of space adventures, it's true. Which was how Kitty met Peter. They decided to keep in contact, even though Kitty went back to Earth with the X-Men and Peter remained in space, and began a sort of like long-distance relationship thing. This would eventually lead to Kitty coming to space to rescue Peter, and then choosing to remain there and kind of date and go on adventures with him more. Eventually they'd become engaged, and he'd even have to leave the Guardians, and she would basically take over for him for a while as StarLord. Even though these two are kind of weird together in some ways, they do still work as a couple, I have to admit, but neither of them is really the first person you'd think of when it comes to either's ideal or most iconic relationships. Like, they work together, but it's still just kind of weird. Batman and Batgirl are an even more bizarre pairing. This is because they are literally like family, and there is such a big age gap that's implied to be between them. Batman is the friend and ally of Jim Gordon, who in many continuities is Barbara Gordon's father, either adoptive or biological, so that's kinda like Batman dating his friend's kid, kinda? Yeah, it's messed up. Fortunately, these two have not made their way to the main comic book continuity as a couple, and instead are pretty much only paired up in the Batman animated series universe, which there are comics of, but it's not main continuity, but you know, still, it's, yeah. If you thought Batman and Batgirl together were strange as two people who are close to having a kind of a father-daughter, or at least kind of like an uncle-niece relationship, this next one is going to straight up blow your mind. We're talking about the relationship between Superman and Supergirl. Yeah, what? Well, don't worry. As strange as this one may sound, it happened in an alternate reality where the two are actually not cousins at all. In fact, both of them are actually from different realities than each other. This was Linda Danvers, who is only kind of filling in for Kara at the time in the comics, and unlike Kara, she was not a Kryptonian and she was not related to Superman. The Superman she ended up with was also, I believe, a different version of Superman from Earth 1, not the New Earth version. New Earth at that time was the main continuity of DC, this is before Prime Earth, I digress. Still, just the idea of Superman and Supergirl ending up as married, just looking at that on a page, given that most people usually think of them as cousins, is pretty weird. It's pretty weird that we paired them at all. Finally, the pièce de résistance, the most nonsensical couple I have for you today, Nate Gray and Madeline Pryor. Insanely bizarre when you consider that Madeline Pryor is the mother of Cable, aka Nathaniel Summers, who is an alternate version of course, Nate Gray. And even if we're willing to let this go somewhat, because Maddie isn't actually Nate's mom since he's from an alternate world, he just looks kind of similar to and is an alternate version of her son Cable, there is still the fact that Madeline is of course a clone of Jean Grey, and Jean Grey is still Nate's biological mother. The only way I can even think of how Marvel justified this when they gave it a pass and were like, yeah, you could print that, is that Nate wasn't actually raised by Scott or Jean really in his universe. He was like a test tube baby created by Sinister who escaped Sinister's clutches, and then instead he was raised by his adoptive father Forge. But still, this is weird, right? The genetic crossover is, it's weird.
Number 10. Batman and Wonder Woman. Oh Wonder Bat, we meet again. When it comes to pairing up the Trinity, people normally go for the super obvious jock cheerleader style pairing of Superman and Wonder Woman, and there's nothing wrong with the tried and true. But some people want something a little bit more peculiar, and so they go Batman and Wonder Woman. And of course, for people like me, an intellectual, you can always go Superbat. Anyway, this pairing appeared most prominently in the DCAU's Justice League. But in the modern era, Batman at the time of this recording, during the arc when he was engaged to Selina, it happened again. You know that a character being engaged or in a relationship is catnip to writers. They just perk right up and go, what? Taken? Cheating? Where? So this occurred in Batman 39 and 40, so in Batman's own book, and it was an almost cheat. All of a sudden Wonder Woman is just like, Bruce, he's taken. Time to make my move. Them moving in for a kiss is the cliffhanger of issue 39. And then in 40, Batman is all like, no, I can't, I'm marrying Selina. Ha, no you aren't. DC says no marriages. I just love that this was a will he or won't he cheat cliffhanger. Na 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 na, not a cheater. But he thought about it real hard. However, then we have the Justice League book. Number 9. Batman and Jessica Cruz, one of the Green Lanterns. So internal memos, they matter. Tell people what you're doing. Over in Justice League 38, which now in the timeline they say, oh no, this will all happen before, after, but not at the same time as Catwoman. However, when all of this was coming out, or depending upon how you read it, this was Cheating City. So Batman was the leader of the Justice League. Why? I don't know. Who would vote for that? Anyway, he didn't handle an arc well with a certain baddie, called the Fan, who yes, of course, was an obsessed fan and a jab at bad modern comic fans. So a pleasure to read. Who doesn't love seeing themselves mocked or satirized for the actions of a vocal few who have come to be the ambassadors for the whole? I know I don't. Batman was asked to resign by Superman after all of this, and he does, but Jessica Cruz, who suddenly has feelings for him after spending issues pining after Barry Allen, follows him into the locker room and is all, well, this is about to get complicated, and kisses him, and he just stands there. Hot? Yeah, this is one of those weird overlap things where it's okay in one book but not in another. New 52 vibes. Number 8. Tim Drake and Jubilee. Cheating on spoiler. Woohoo! Love for Tim Drake, by which I mean we're talking about him. He has been very sidelined of late. So Marvel and DC ran a crossover series in the 90s. They've had many crossovers, but this one is one of the better remembered because it would lead into the Amalgam universe. During the fighting portion of this, where characters had to battle to see who was strongest, Tim was paired up against Jubilee. And she was so thirsty. She thought he was the cutest and wasn't shy about it. In fact, it would be part of why she lost the battle. Yes, Jubilee, now classified as some Omega potential, or well, she was pre-House of X, but still with decent abilities, was defeated by Robin. She would share a kiss with him despite him having a girlfriend and him telling her that. And she would actually cross dimensions later on to see him again. He looks so flattered but also horrified. It's an interesting emotional mix and probably accurate. Jubilee needs to calm down. Crossing dimensions and companies. Number 7. SpiderMan and Silk cheating on Anna. Spider-Man has had many love interests, and some have been quite iconic. You know them, Mary Jane, Gwen Stacy, the Black Cat, Felicia Hardy, but there are others, and post his time as Superior Spider-Man, one of those was Anna Maria, kinda. She was a great match for him intellectually and an asset in helping him run his company. The rationale behind why she was there was kind of, well, they meant it well, but it's one of those compliments that is a backhand insult, with Slott talking about how all of Peter's love interests had been traditionally beautiful and how that was unrealistic and it was time to change that. So basically tokenizing Anna and reducing her down to one of her traits, her dwarfism. That's gross. Anna deserves better. She also deserved better than to be cheated on. She comes home and those two are on the ceiling. Okay, so the relationship between Peter and Anna is complicated. It was kind of platonic because she was more in love with Otto, who had been in Peter's body before that, but they still live together and share an apartment. On the ceiling. Come on, Peter. This was cause Silk and Peter, their pheromones interact and they actually can't keep their hands off each other, which also gross. Though that's my opinion. Some love it and think that makes them endgame. Share your thoughts down below. Number 6. Scott Summers, Madeline Pryor, and Jean Grey. Get ready. Oh yes, it's time for Scott, cheater extraordinaire, in the arc that started a lot of fans on the path towards hating him. So, Jean Grey died after the whole Phoenix Saga thing, and Scott was devastated, but that changed when he met a woman who looked exactly exactly like Jean, Madeline Pryor, who it turned out looked so much like her because she was her clone, made for him by Mr. Sinister. He would go on to marry her and have a child, Nathaniel, Nate, aka Cable, with her. However, Jean was alive and Scott would leave his family to be with her, not keeping in touch with them and not telling Jean about his new life and kid. What a winner. This arc would make many fans majorly lose sympathy for Cyclops. I mean, the actions are hardly heroic, which is fine, but it also makes sense why people don't want to get behind him either. Number 5. Connor Kent, Wonder Girl, and Tim Drake. So this one can be chalked up to sadness. So Wonder Girl, Cassandra Sandsmark, was dating Superboy, Connor Kent, but he up and died as you do, and she was distraught. So was his best friend Tim Drake, and the two, well, they just needed some comfort, and they were both there, and they both knew him, and while emotions got out of control, things happened. However, Connor wasn't dead, cause who is? I mean, really, yes, be sad, but you should give people a grace period, because I mean, look at how long Clark took before he came back to life. You gotta give people at least 2 months. But after all of this, Cassandra kinda liked him too. But this whole arc died hard. They're all separated or were, but it happened, so it counts. Number 4. The Invisible Woman, Sue Storm, Namor, and Reed Richards. Now, the 2018 Fantastic Four comic had the audacity to say that Namor and Sue aren't canon. Where were you? This is a thing. At the very least, she is having an emotional affair with him. Namor has been in love with Sue pretty much since he saw her, and they have been the focus of several what-ifs where they end up married. Also, just alternate dimension universe stories where they're also married. But even in Mainverse, the two have shared kisses. He's asked her to be his queen. Even Reed and Sue's son knows that Namor is in love with her. Namor has told Reed to his face that he has been trying to get Sue to leave him. This is when they were both on the Illuminati. Namor and Sue have a long history. She seeks him out when she is sad or neglected, and he has and will go above and beyond for her. They have a deep relationship, and Reed for his part just kinda lets it happen. Sue and Reed have a complex marriage. Sue loves Reed despite everything, but he's also been very distant and neglectful, and she sought comfort elsewhere, even if at times it's just emotional. Nowadays, Reed is a more attentive husband and father, but Namor is there, waiting. He's always waiting. He's patient. She could be queen of the sea. Even Valeria, her and Reed's daughter, called her mom out for co-signing her father's behavior and went to live with Doom for a bit. Doom is her godfather, and he named her. The more you know. Number 3. Scott Summers, Jean Grey, and Emma Frost. Hello, Scott. We meet again, for the last time, on this list at least. So this happened during Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, when Emma Frost would find herself becoming a teacher at Xavier's school. This was after the genocide on Genosha, which is hard to say. She would enter into a relationship with Scott under the guise of therapy, and while there they would do some role-playing, which would involve her transforming into Jean as the Phoenix, and this got kinky real fast. And Scott, once a cheater always a cheater Summers, was down. So these two would carry on this affair until Jean found out and tortured Emma with her worst memories. And then Jean would just nope out noble sacrifice, so we never really had to deal with any of it. And now we have House of X, where maybe Jean, Scott, and Logan are a throuple. Comic canon is a wonderful, beautiful, changing, magical place. Don't date or marry Scott Summers. This has been a PSA. Number 2. Aquaman, Mera, and Dolphin. This was another sad, grief-driven cheating. So Black Manta killed Arthur and Mera's son, and in a depressing bit of realism, this drives the couple apart, and she actually seemingly leaves him for another dimension and to grieve. And so eventually he's like, okay, I guess it's time to move on, and he takes up with Dolphin. However, then suddenly Mera is all, I'm back, and annoyed that he is even with Dolphin, even though it's been a long time. So the two would eventually reconcile and move on. But this one had some extenuating circumstances. Is it stepping out if your wife is in another dimension and kind of implied that she was never coming back? I don't know. Tell me your thoughts. And number 1. Dick Grayson, Barbara Gordon, and Starfire. The question of who should be with Dick Grayson has been an ongoing one. Barbara Gordon or Starfire. He has had profound relationships with both. He's asked both to marry him, and at one point cheated on Starfire, who was his fiancée at the time, with Barbara. So what happened? Well, he went to see Barbara to invite her to his wedding, but it was shortly after all of the Killing Joke stuff and she was Oracle, and the two ended up sleeping together and comforting each other, and Barbara thought they were getting back together. But in the morning he gave her the invitation to his wedding. That's right, he hadn't told her. She rightfully threw the invitation in his face. Just wow, Dick, way to live up to your name. Rick would never, because he's not interesting enough.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have She-Hulk and Thor. With the Eternals trailer dropping recently, this first couple might not be too far off in the MCU. It might just happen. When the final host of the Dark Celestials attacked Earth, Jen Walters was near where Eson the Searcher made landfall, and it telepathically called out to Jen for help. Now the Celestial gave Jen more gamma radiation after that, so she was stronger than ever at this point. Now cut to issue 8, she's a full-on savage. She's literally in savage mode, not just how the kids say savage. It's literally, she's a savage Hulk at this point. And by issue 11, she was pretty involved with Thor. Now, it wasn't a great start to the relationship though, because Jen was actually fully convinced that Thor only desired her because of her newfound Hulk strength, and it wasn't actually Jen Walters that he was attracted to. Although he says otherwise, but it's a little sketchy. Number 9, Ultimate Hulk and his 39 girlfriends. The Ultimates are a pretty awesome time. In part 1 of this list, I mentioned Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch from the Ultimates, which was a little yuck, to say the least. The Ultimates are a little bit more risque, if you will. And in Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, we see a side to the Hulk that's less angry and more, well, you probably can guess by the title that I said. Now it starts with Wolverine getting ripped into two. He has to crawl himself back together. It's absolutely brutal. So Nick Fury has sent Logan to eliminate the Hulk, and so far it wasn't going as planned. Clearly. After receiving a stool sample, Wolverine was able to track the Hulk down. Oh, and yes, he stitched himself back together. That happened first. Don't worry about that. So once Wolverine catches up to him in Tibet, he hears loud thumps. Now look, I know this technically isn't a couple, but it's too amazing to leave out, so of course I had to include this. Wolverine opens the door to this hidden temple, and behold, it's Hulk and his 39 girlfriends, maybe even more. I don't know, I kind of lost count, not gonna lie. It looks kind of cozy though. It's a nice atmosphere, it's good. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to give us a thumbs up on these videos, that would be great, because it really does help the studio out quite a bit, especially while we're still working from home. You all are the best. Thank you so much for your support. Let's get right back into this weird hookup list. Number 8, Wolverine and Amir. Wolverine has also been around the block too when it comes to hookups, okay? He's not getting out of this easy. Sometimes it's casual, like when Domino got involved with the Assassin's Guild and the Hand. She needed a way to get her mind off of these events, so friends with benefits with Wolverine sounded like the right thing to do, and it worked. They were both happy. It was great. But in Wolverine Volume 3, Issue 48, the friends with benefits thing hits a new low for Logan. Literally, he starts hooking up with an Atlantean for like 10 issues. She even says for Logan not to think about them hooking up in any romantic way, because Atlanteans don't have the same hang-ups that humans do when it comes to physical intimacy. Nice. Okay. Logan says he wasn't really worried in the first place. He just happens to let out all his secrets because maybe, you know, he just feels like lately he has to tell someone. That's all. Logan's just a bit lonely. It happens. I'm pretty sure Logan just has a thing for Atlanteans. Don't lie, Logan. Number 7, Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. This one we couldn't leave out for part 2. I'm actually surprised that I didn't use it for part 1. Perhaps one of the more nightmare couples to hit the pages, the since past storyline begins in Amazing Spider-Man issue 509. And the main story is that Norman and Gwen, well, they had twins. It was revealed that before Gwen's death, the two of them had an affair. And the story is crazy. Spider-Man ends up fighting the twins, all the while he's having to deal with the fact that Gwen Stacy is dead. A lot of trauma in Spider-Man's pages. The amount of emotional baggage this poor kid must carry around. So Norman raised the kids, Gabriel and Sarah. And the thing is, they aged 3 times as fast as normal kids. So when I said Peter fought the kids, I didn't mean he's not going around boxing infants. No, these kids are older and they know how to fight. They're the mass vigilantes that actually attack Peter at the beginning when he's paying respects to Gwen in the first place. So he attacked him while he was visiting their mother. What a weird time. Apparently they were supposed to grow up to be this one big happy goblin family, which sounds like not a thing. That's not a thing. There's no such thing as a happy goblin family. So when Peter found this out, he was a little upset. Number 6, Black Panther and Monica Lynn. This one's pretty nuts. Okay, it just takes a turn out of nowhere. Oh my gosh, readers were just in shock with this one. So Monica Lynn first appeared in comics back in Avengers issue 73. She grew up in Georgia but moved to New York when she then met Black Panther, and he saved her from the Sons of the Serpent. And in usual comic book fashion, they fell for each other, and it was working out. It was actually a pretty good thing. It was great, so much so that Monica actually lived in Wakanda at one point. She was in the family. But then in Black Panther, Panther's Prey issue 4, he just calls off their engagement. Oh yeah, they were engaged, by the way. And then Black Panther's like, nope, no more. Just kidding. I don't know. I wasn't feeling it. No explanation, nothing. And then what makes this more even heartbreaking is that later on in Black Panther Volume 4, issue 16, Monica is seen again. This time she's performing. She's a great singer, and just like Adele, she is singing her heart out to a full crowd in Washington, D.C. She's killing it. She reflects through her lyrics on the heartbreak and the fact that Black Panther is now marrying Storm. Knew there was a reason behind his actions. Turning tragedy into art. That's commitment right there, folks. Number 5, Ant-Man and Beetle. In Ant-Man Last Days issue 1, we catch up with Scott Lang, and he's at the club. He's just laying low, he's trying to get his dancing on, I don't know, he's trying to shake it off. He sees Beetle there, which is not good news, because Beetle recently had fought Ant-Man back in New York. He's already in a bad mood. He said the club smelled like Axe body spray. He didn't want to be there in the first place. And now there's a villain there. He's like, all right, I gotta go report this to the authorities. Let's get this done. She thinks that he's stalking her at first, but it turns out they actually just live in the same neighborhood. So she explains to Scott that she's a rich, hot, half-Dominican girl with ties to organized crime, and this is where she goes to party, so it's not a surprise that she's there. You know, it's a hoot and holler in time when the dude in the background's yelling, "Flow Rida." That's how you know you're in a sick place. But she admits to Scott that she's attracted to the way that he fought back at Stark's place, you know, and she tried to kill Iron Man back when that happened. So they grab a drink and they chat about life and the Avengers and all that jazz, and then Scott reminds himself of something that Captain America told him. If you want to be an Avenger, you can't sleep with a supervillain. And the very next page, we can confirm that he did not follow that rule. Just a naked Scott Lang, just a dude with an A-pack wearing an Ant-Man helmet. What a sight. What a sight to see. Number 4, Black Widow and Spider-Man. This one is... yeah, pretty weird. I'd say weird. In Marvel Team Up issue 82 titled No Way to Treat a Lady, the story begins with Nancy outside when a couple of punks try to steal her bag. Thankfully, Spider-Man comes in and saves the day. I mean, mostly. Nancy delivers the final blow, this time saving Spider-Man's back. So he sees the Black Widow suit in her bag, but she doesn't know what he's talking about. She doesn't think that she's Black Widow. She's convinced that she's this Nancy lady, although she very much is Black Widow. So Spider-Man offers her the suit in order to keep her warm, and then when she gets the outfit on, it of course fits perfectly. But again, this doesn't snap her out of it. She still believes that she's Nancy Rushman. And then in comes the S.H.I.E.L.D. strike force with plans to shoot Black Widow. Not good. So Spider-Man gets grazed by a bullet during all this madness. And just then there's a moment where Nancy's body acts by itself almost, like a reflex. She lunges towards the strike force member and takes them down with ease. Confused how she did so still. So they end up sticking together for a bit, and then in issue 84, Nancy decides that they're close enough and she goes in for the kiss. She likes him, but in Spider-Man's words, it was the wrong feelings in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I couldn't agree more. So in issue 85, her memory finally comes back to her, and after saving the day, Black Widow confesses to Peter that Nancy and him had something special, but she is in fact not Nancy. Close, Pete. Pretty close. Number 3, Winter Soldier and Black Widow. Around the time of the Cold War in the Soviet Union, Natalia trained Bucky Barnes in the Red Room alongside other students. She and Bucky hit it off. I mean, they had a lot in common. The whole Russian brainwashing, assassin skills, Natalia working for the KGB, the whole super soldier thing, they had a lot in common. It was dark stuff, but still stuff they had in common nonetheless. They were great for each other during this time. They made each other feel like they were more than just assassins. They found love, the true meaning of life. Then they get brainwashed, sent on a mission, break some necks, come back, forget about it all, and then fall in love again. It was a nice circle. So without knowing it, they both had quite the history in comics. And in the MCU as well, Natasha says a line to Bucky after he escapes in Civil War. She says, "The least you can do is recognize me." Now, is this her about getting shot from the brainwashed Buck earlier in Iran? Or perhaps will we see a flashback to her training days with Buck back in her solo flick? More Bucky, let's do it. Number 2, Captain America and Sharon Carter. If we're talking about relationships in the MCU, then perhaps one of the most weird ones to come out of it is Sharon and Steve. See, Captain America was in love with Peggy Carter since he was a little guy back in the war. And then years and years later, when he's an established Avenger, she's much older and they're still in love. Even until she passes away, they're still in love. And then the next movie, the dude's making out with Sharon at the airport, just like that. Even the actor who played Peggy, Haley Atwell, said at Comic-Con that she's not a fan of the new couple. She says, "I just feel like I wouldn't want to date my great aunt's guy. It just feels like it crosses an incestuous boundary, and Peggy just died." Yep, you couldn't have said it any better. In the comics, when Cap first went on a mission to take Batroc Leaper down, Sharon was by his side and the two hit it off then. She's actually one of the first people to learn about his alter ego, fun fact. Cap is honestly insane in the MCU. I mean, Peggy and then Sharon, and then time travel again, and then Peggy again. The dude, like, just swipe left. There's so many fish in the sea, just swipe left. There's so many apps. Number 1, She-Hulk and Tony Stark. This one we can find in She-Hulk issue 17, and it's pretty... she brings up a good point. So Tony at the time is a director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Jen Walters at this point was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And it all started with a debriefing. Now, it might have been the most unprofessional debriefing of all time. There were no PowerPoints, there were no conference calls, there was nobody else really. It was just Tony saying that he wanted to talk to Jen alone. It's really unprofessional. Clay Quarterman's upset about this, but he's only upset because he feels like he should be the one in there if anybody. Just totally missing the point. The next few pages, it cuts to Jen and Tony in bed, just like earlier with Ant-Man and Beetle. Jen brings up a pretty good point here. She asked Tony that why when he sleeps around, everybody calls him a player and he's like Mr. Cool Dude with sunglasses, but when she sleeps around, she's called much worse things. She says it's a double standard, and honestly, I have to agree. But right before Tony can even respond, they're called to action when the ship is attacked. Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Squirrel Girl and Wolverine. Doreen Green made her comic book debut in Marvel Superheroes Volume 2, Issue 8. See, back in the early 90s, she was born with these fantastic squirrel abilities, including a tail to complete the picture. In the New Avengers Volume 2, Issue 7, the two of them have a brief interaction that hints that they could have been romantically involved at one point. There's some tension in the air, that's for sure. They're talking about being professional and also how amazing they look too. That's already enough evidence in my mind, but to make things even more interesting, later on in Wolverine Volume 4, Issue 8, Doreen is seen in Wolverine's mindscape with Emma Frost, Mystique, Spiral, and Jewel. This was the sexual fantasies room, so I mean, proof's in the pudding, guys. Number 9, Crystal and Quicksilver. In Fantastic Four, Issue 45, Johnny Storm met Crystal, sister of Medusa, and they hit it off naturally. Johnny thought she was straight out of a fairy tale, and once they showed each other their powers, well, love. Love comes next, of course. The Fantastic Four needed a replacement temporarily while Sue was recovering from having their first child, so this Inhuman, Crystal, was looking to fill that spot. So Johnny and Crystal dated after this, and Crystal was front cover by time Fantastic Four issue 81 rolled around. And then in Avengers 104, after a battle with a Sentinel, Quicksilver gets hurt. So Crystal brought him back to her homeworld to heal him, and while they were there, the two of them ended up kind of falling in love. Everything happens fast in Pietro's life. If I was Johnny, I'd have a few choice words for him, that's for sure. And before we continue on with this list of weird superhero couples, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does help us a lot, especially while we're working from home. Those thumbs up really add up and help us out. You guys are the best, thank you so much. Now let's get right back into this list. Enough wasting time. Number 8, Toad and Husk. When Toad was amongst the lucky few to have kept their powers after the events of M-Day, he didn't save the world one day at a time. Instead, he became a janitor at the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. He kept the school clean, he kept the kids on track. And then when the Phoenix Force approached Earth, Quentin Quire fell from the sky and Toad leaped far and wide to catch him. This impressed Husk quite a bit. So she quit the school thinking Kitty would just fire her anyways, and then she joined the Hellfire Academy later on, and she kind of made Toad betray the school once they started clicking. She's a little aggressive in her ways, some would say. Relationships have their ups and downs, but this is just another level. Because at the end of this 5-part roller coaster of emotions, Paige didn't even remember the entire thing. Poor Paige. And also poor Toad. I mean, he's gripping that mop tighter and tighter every day. All 5 parts are really fun. This relationship is nuts. I'd love to have Toad come and clean my place, just hang out, keep me in line, you know, he'd be nice. Number 7. Thor and Jane Foster. When it comes to Norse mythology, Thor's wife is Lady Sif. Now in the comics, it's a bit more complicated than that. They were on and off for a while, and I feel like we're gonna get a love triangle in the MCU soon. I mean, it's confirmed that Lady Sif and Jane Foster are both returning in Thor: Love and Thunder. So this could lead to a little triangle of romance, who knows? In Journey into Mystery issue 102, Thor had fallen in love with Lady Sif. So much so that when Sif had been kidnapped by storm giants and ended up as a prisoner of Hela, Thor volunteered as tribute. He actually wanted to trade lives. And Hela was so impressed, she was like, you know what? I'm just gonna let you both go. That's love. I don't know what to do here. And then in Thor issue 236, Sif sacrificed her own life in order to save Jane's. See, Jane in the comics became Thor, but her cancer got worse every time she got mighty and used the powers of Thor. So maybe the reality gem in the MCU has caused some life-altering effects to Jane, and then Lady Sif can somehow be the only one to save her at the end of Thor: Love and Thunder. Wouldn't that be sad? That would be sad, actually. Yeah, that'd be kind of pretty sad. I say this is a weird couple because the MCU has treaded lightly around it. Why Jane is the love interest at all beats me. I mean, the long distance alone, that would be enough for me to be like, nope, bye. Number 6. Kitty Pryde and Colossus. When people say age is just a number, that's like a couple years we're talking about. Maybe you're in your late 20s, you meet somebody in their early 30s. It's not that far off, but it sounds far off. That's what we're talking about when we say age is just a number. When it comes to Marvel romances, the whole age thing is a little gross. It's kind of gross. When the first two met in X-Men issue 129, she's said to be like 13 years old. They're trying to recruit her to go to Professor X's school, and Colossus is like 18 at the time, or somewhere around 20. He's like an adult. Now, in the Days of Future Past storyline, beginning in X-Men issue 151, we see Kitty and Colossus married in that future. So that's nice. I think. It's nice to know that they really are head over heels for each other. It kind of helps, especially when it started with their first kiss during a space mission, and right before they kiss, Kitty even says, "Gee, I wish I was older," and Colossus is like, "So do I," and then proceeds to kiss her anyways. Number 5, Iron Man and Gamora. If you put 2008 Tony Stark in a room with Gamora, like pre-Pepper Potts, I guarantee you that guy would at least turn on the charm. The idea doesn't come out of nowhere though. I mean, Tony and Gamora, believe it or not, have hooked up before. So the panel starts with Gamora being all coy and cool. She says the line, "Well, you're gonna have to do much better out here." And Tony responds in his classic Tony Stark manner, "I can do better." And then it immediately cuts to Tony laying next to her in bed. They look like they just had the time of their lives. Tony's all tucked in the blanket. He looks shell-shocked. Gamora's pretty chill about it. She's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go back to the bar. See ya." And then Tony's like, "Cool, true." And then after she leaves, Tony lets out the slightest, "Ow." Yeah, you don't say. It's probably gonna be a painful one. Number 4, SpiderMan and Black Hat. Peter Parker and Felicia Hardy, one of the more interesting relationships in Peter's life. Well, rather, Spider-Man's life. And there's a difference here between the two. You'll see. So she entered comics back in 1979 with Amazing Spider-Man issue 194. Now, when she met Spider-Man, they were of course both in costume. She fell for him, his charm, his quips. She could tell that he was a kind soul and she trusted him. It was turning into quite the romance between the two, and eventually Peter felt like the time was right and revealed his true self. He unmasked himself. And she had a tough time accepting the fact that he was just an average kid under the mask. Should have left the mask on, Pete. Rough. I mean, looks really don't matter, but when you're a superhero, it's probably different. This is taken to the next level in the Ultimate Comics. When Black Cat finds out that Spider-Man's just a kid, she literally throws up all over him. So sometimes it's better to keep things a mystery, I think. Number 3, Wolverine and Lyn's son. This next one happens in the 4-parter Wolverine Manifest Destiny. So when Wolverine was in Chinatown, San Francisco, he saved a woman named Lynn from the crime lord, the Black Dragon. Now she refers to him as her lover in issue 3. Things are cooking, nice. Now what Wolverine doesn't realize is that by successfully taking out the Black Dragon, which he did, Logan now has to take that spot. He becomes that role. So naturally he refused, but by refusing, that upset Lynn. To quit would be dishonorable to everybody. So while he was leaving, she stabbed him in the eye with a spear, warning him not to return. So when the X-Men relocated to San Francisco, he took a trip down memory lane and returned, but this time Lynn was not the same. "Lynn is dead, lover," she says. "You killed her a long time ago." And she goes on to explain how now she is the Black Dragon, Queen of the Triads, Empress of the Chinatown underworld. Wolverine took over as the new Black Dragon, and Lynn escaped through the sewers, holding the same spearhead. Number 2, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Of course I'm gonna mention this couple on this list. From the Ultimate Universe, this is one of the weirder ones. In the 3rd issue of the Ultimates, the Wasp is like, "Man, those two sure do love each other, those siblings." And then Cap's like, "Well, of course they do. They're family, they're siblings." Even in the 1st issue, like way back in the original X-Men, Pietro tells Toad to stop chewing so loudly in front of his sister. They're close. But in the 3rd issue, the Wasp is like, dude, he loves her. Like, loves her. And then Captain America makes the same face that readers did at that point. Yeah, that's a weird one. Number 1, Wolverine and MJ. The Ultimate Universe has some interesting elements, as we just heard, and after Ultimate Spider-Man issue 66, it got even more weird when Wolverine and Spider-Man switched bodies. Mesmero switched their bodies, so Peter was like, "Hey man, I really need you to go to school. We've seen these Freaky Friday change-up style movies before. The whole fun is pretending to be the other person and trying to blend in with their lives." That's where the comedy comes from, right? This sounds like a hilarious adventure ready to happen, but while Wolverine was in Peter's body, he at one point ended up kissing Mary Jane. And it's made out like he even wants to date her, like he wants to go further after the kiss. MJ told him that she wants to wait until they're older for that kind of thing though, so thankfully nothing happened during this change up. But the kiss and the idea in the first place, yuck, you know? Yuck. I was gonna save Hulk Gang for number 1, but creepy Wolverine takes the cake.
Number 10, Sabertooth and Mystique. Did somebody say toxic? Take one highly violent beast man with a knack and enjoyment for ending lives and hurting people, and pair it with a slippery, manipulative, identity-stealing shapeshifter, and it's bound to be a recipe for disaster. But yet they try and try again. The pair even have a son together, Graydon Creed, and because of them, he absolutely despises mutants. Way to go, mom and dad. Their relationships together almost always include some kind of mental or physical torment, and I hope to the one above all that no one has these two as their couple goals. Number 9, Cyclops and Madeline Pryor. So you're Cyclops, right? The red-headed woman you love, Jean Grey, she goes cray-cray and ends up apparently de-lifing on the moon. You're distraught, broken up. You leave your team of letter X themed compatriots, and then along comes another fiery red-headed woman who is the exact copy, some could even say clone, of your long lost love. What do? If you said marry that lookalike at the drop of a hat, then yes, you really are Cyclops. The Mr. Sinister created clone of Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor, got married to this heartbroken Cyclops within like a month. And they even created a little baby in the form of Cable. Then what do you know, Jean Grey shows back up and Cyclops drops his new wife and the baby about as fast as he married her. Cyclops, you giant weirdo. Number 8. Angel and Husk. A few entries on this list have to do with age differences, but most of the other couples who have a huge age gap at least have a tiny bit of decency. The same cannot be said for 30-year-old Warren Worthington III and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Paige Guthrie, otherwise known as Husk. The age difference is large for sure, but it's not the biggest gap we've seen. The real problem comes with an extremely uncomfortable moment in Uncanny X-Men number 440, when Warren and Paige fully give in to their love for each other. In the sky. In front of Paige's mom, who Warren was just explaining the situation to. It's awkward as hell, and then to make it kind of more hilarious / worse, the bad guys show up on the ground while they are mid-air sans clothing. Whole new meaning to PDA right there. Number 7. Hawkeye and Mockingbird. With the inclusion of Clint Barton's family in the MCU, non-comic book fans might be surprised to know that his family wasn't really a thing in the comics, not until the Ultimate Universe version of the character came around. The MCU Hawk family may be an attempt to get away from the awful couple of Hawkeye and Mockingbird, which honestly sort of seems like a cheap way of capitalizing on the Green Arrow and Black Canary coupling that DC had going on. But these two were nowhere near as compatible as the DC counterparts. The best example of that would be the whole thing surrounding a guy called Phantom Rider. Mockingbird is caught and physically mistreated by Phantom Rider, and she eventually gets her revenge, taking the Rider's life. Now Hawkeye, instead of supporting his traumatized partner, is scared off by the fact that she de-lifed her assailant, and he splits up with her. While that could maybe be understandable, it all got retconned so that Mockingbird actually got with Phantom Rider by her own consent. So then, when she took his life for seemingly no reason it seems, Hawkeye just used the killing as an excuse when the real reason was because she cheated. Kinda weird. I don't know. Number 6. Havoc and Nurse Annie. This one is kind of just strange to me. For starters, this relationship is based on nothing other than a nurse doing her job. When the mutant Havoc was put into a coma, his nurse, Annie Gazikanian, whose name I think I utterly butchered and who I shall now refer to as Nurse Annie, was the one who cared for him. During the time she was caring for Alex Summers, she actually fell in love with him and even moved to the Xavier Institute to continue that care. I should also add, Nurse Annie was particularly anti-mutant, being pretty passive-aggressive at times with that sentiment too. So it was interesting that when the Summers brother came back too, he reciprocated the love that this nurse imparted on her unconscious patient. So much so that he even left his fiancée, Polaris, a fiancée whom he had a great relationship with that no one had a problem with, who is the daughter of an incredibly powerful mutant, Magneto. A fiancée who he not only left, but left at the altar to pursue a relationship with a mutant disliking nurse who even occasionally went about kissing Bobby Drake. Can you imagine how long Havoc and Nurse Annie lasted? That's right, not very long. Number 5. Rogue and Magneto. I always think of Rogue being with Remy LeBeau, Gambit. Their relationship is iconic. It has its issues, but it endures it all. Her relationship in the Age of Apocalypse story, however, I do not like. Age of Apocalypse was an awesome alternate dimension story, and I love it. Except for this one thing that just makes me uncomfy. Rogue in this world is a freedom fighter working with Magneto's X-Men, and her friend, Wanda Maximoff, passes on. She makes a promise to be a companion to the Master of Magnetism himself. The two grew closer and closer. This young woman and the 60-year-old leader of the team. So close so that she even chose him over Gambit, leaving Gambit to pass away. She then married Magneto and even had a son with him. She married her best friend's dad because said friend's dying wish was to be his companion. I don't care if their powers cancel each other out or whatever the reason is. It's weird and it's strange and it feels unnatural. And I ain't here for it, people. I ain't here for it. Number 4. Multiple Man and Sirin. How can you trust a man who can be in multiple places at once? That's honestly all I should have to say, but for context on why you actually can't, the mutant Jamie Madrox, otherwise known as Multiple Man, was in a relationship with the daughter of Banshee, Teresa Cassidy. And one fateful night he got much too intoxicated, and using his abilities he was able to have conjugal experiences with both his wife and another woman, their teammate Monese Croix, or M, at the same time. And then he completely forgot which one he had been with. For some reason, Teresa forgave him, but then she got pregnant, with the baby turning out to just be another multiple of Jamie, who was then reabsorbed back into Jamie's body. What the hell? Number 3, Ultimate Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. We don't want any of this here, please and thank you. Look, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff have been close, always. It's led to some truly awesome and horrible comic book moments. There's no doubting they love each other as siblings. And that didn't need to change, okay? I understand Marvel was making its Ultimate Universe in a way to make it more realistic and to make their characters just as hateable as they can be without losing readers' interest. But this was just as unnecessary as having the Blob eat Janet Van Dyne. And then you made Wolverine, who was hinted to be their father, come and do some creepy spying on the weird brother-sister couple and act. Why, man? Why? Number 2, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Probably the only relationship on this list that actually ended a comic book character's comic book career. This relationship was bad from the beginning, and that can largely land on Hank Pym's increasingly tiny shoulders. Or large shoulders if he's growing, I don't know. From the moment comic book fans saw him strike his wife and partner, Janet Van Dyne, there was no real saving him. Comic book sales for Ant-Man even took a dip after it happened. Just take the fact that he actually kidnapped her to try and get the relationship to marriage in the first place, and the fact that it worked, and you gotta know this is a bad duo. Sure, Hank Pym has a whole host of mental problems that leads to his codependency and the psychological and physical mistreatment he inflicts on his on-again, off-again lover. But the Wasp, she should absolutely know better than to stay with this lunatic. And in at number 1 is Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy. This is 100% the creepiest entry on this list, and I don't care who you are or what you say. The Spider-Man story, Sins of the Past, contains within its strange pages the revelation that Gwen Stacy, Peter's former lover and a teenager, was having an ongoing affair with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, a very creepy, full-grown man old enough to be her father. Not only was she even having an affair, it even resulted with Gwen secretly giving birth to twins. Twins that became a pair of assassins. I do not recommend reading this story because all you'll be able to see when you close your eyes is the incredibly creepy image of Norman and his Green Goblin face as he is laying on top of Gwen. I can't talk about this anymore, I'm getting the creeps. Let's wrap this up now, please.